Okay, my name is Larry McGlynn, and you are listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor here on WPPM 106.5 FM in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHMWPPM. Today on the program, we'll be joined by Will Ford of Maryland Matters to discuss the recent Supreme Court ruling regarding parental objection to books in their children's schools. Lance Haber will report on the latest updates regarding SEPTA, and we will discuss today's strike resolution. Denise, how are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. We all woke up this morning to the news that the strike had been resolved.
hmm
I guess that's what we could call it.
Resolution is probably the nicest way to put it.
Yeah, yeah. So this has been going on for 8 days now. We have the resolution. We weren't sure what was going to happen. With these things, there's always a lot of discussion, a lot of rumors. Nobody's entirely sure what's happening, but it's at least it seems like it is where it's going to be. What are your takeaways from this, Denise?
Okay. I'm going to preface this by saying what I have been saying when I've been asked about this most of today is remember you asked. Um, First of all, while I don't remember it exactly, I remember enough of the 1986 strike in the second administration of Wilson Goode, where the District Council 33 went out on strike. It was a 20-day strike, and they were brought back to work through through a legal injunction, because trash had piled up all over the place. There's this famous photograph of a mountain of trash outside of what was once Veterans Stadium. And they were forced to go back to work because folks said, this is going to be a real issue in terms of health and people's like environmental issues and different things. That is where I saw this strike going, because what I was noticing during during negotiations was that the mayor was spending as much time in court as
Yeah.
she was at the negotiating table. Over the last 8 days, first it was the 911 operators who were forced back to work. Then it was the water treatment people who were forced back to work.
And these were, I guess, what you would call an emergency injunction. The
Yes.
argument being these people are essential to public health.
hmm And then you had the people who are medical examiner assistants that pick up dead bodies, and they had to go back to work. And I started to notice a pattern that every time the union said, this is what we want, this is what we think is most important, this is what we think you should pay us, folks ended up going back to court and getting more people added to the injunction. And I get the feeling that the folks in the union took a look at what was going on in terms of going to court and who was winning, that they said, we may have to try and work around this deal to make it something that our members don't feel totally screwed over by. But from what I'm seeing in terms of reactions of union members on social media, screwed over is exactly how they feel.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I would not be at all surprised if this contract were voted down, because even Greg Bulware, the president of DC 33, said himself, I don't like this deal. I'm not happy with it. And if the president of the union that allegedly negotiated the contract is coming out saying, I don't like this, I don't like how this happened, I feel like we were, that our time was running out or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
That is a bad omen to me. That
Yeah.
says to me that this may not be the last we've heard of this issue.
I agree. I agree. I would not entirely be surprised if the contract is voted down. I don't know that that's going to happen. I have no special insight into this beyond, the normal way that we get information. But nobody seems happy with this on the union side, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody from District 33 attended the press conference today that the mayor had. That wouldn't surprise me under normal circumstances, I guess. But even today was maybe a little more glaring because they're clearly not happy with this. The entire thing, from beginning to end, it always seemed to me like it was an us or them kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. It wasn't a we're a team kind of thing. It didn't seem that way.
It was
And
not the whole one Philly vibe at all.
no, it wasn't. It wasn't. And I can understand why rank and file union members are not happy and probably feel resentful. When President Boulware talks about running out of time, what I think he meant is another injunction could be coming to compel the garbage collectors to go back to work.
Mm-hmm.
And, once that happens, there is no more leverage. They're back. Contract or not, they're back. And there's really not much more they can do. I suspect that was the impetus in getting this deal finished the way it did. But, it's still the point I've been making from the beginning of this is if the clean and green is your motto and your primary campaign promise and all that, and I think that's excellent. Those are good things to focus on. Why don't we pay the people who are doing that hard work? They're pretty important.
And the thing is, DC 33 has been the city's lowest paid union for
Yes.
decades.
Yes.
And everybody recognizes that. Everybody recognizes that, particularly the trashmen, which are like a big part. These are the people who do the jobs that not a lot of us want to do.
Or could
Like,
do.
I mean,
I'm
it's
not
not
physically
like,
fit. I
right.
can't do a job like that. I have no upper body strength. I can't,
It's not like a whole bunch of us are just running out to try to become trashmen or to try to
Yeah.
become the medical examiner helpers that pick up dead bodies when
These are hard
people either
jobs.
pass away or get shot to death or something. We're not doing those things.
Mm-mm.
Even librarians, at a time right now when books are the most dangerous thing in the world to some people, you have librarians that are part of DC 33. And it's not like people are running around trying to get demanding those jobs. And the people who do them, it would, we should appreciate them. And the best way that you can appreciate somebody is by allowing them to make the kind of money that will allow them to live in the city where it is mandated that they live in order to be continue to work there.
And I'm glad you brought that point up, Denise. I want to run through some of the numbers really quick. So the average garbage collectors in the United States make between $36,000 on the low end and on the really high end, $58,000. That's still not enough for a really tough job. I don't think it is. I'm going to editorialize. It's not enough money because these are hard jobs. So in Philadelphia, and by the way, if we were the way this contract ended up, the 3-year average for a sanitation worker is just below $50,000 a year. Okay. which works out to something like $24 or $25 an hour if for a 40-hour week. Okay, something like that. So if you're an adult and you're making about $50,000 a year, you need to make, and you're single adult, right? To live in Philadelphia, you need to make $23.26 an hour. So if you're a single adult, you're right there, just about. Okay. But if you're a single adult with a child, that number shoots up to $43.77 an hour. Right? So you're a single parent with one child. You need to make $20 more an hour to make it in Philadelphia, to live in Philadelphia. That's a really, really hard ask if you're a single parent. And that's just one child. Single parent with two children, almost $57 an hour. You know, I mean, these are tough numbers. If you're an adult and you have a partner who isn't working, well, now you need to make, and no children, by the way, just a partner who isn't working, $32.63 an hour is what you need to make it to live in the city, which, by the way, you are required to do if you work for the city. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of money. That's hard. That's hard. And this is where it gets bad, right? If you have a child, one parent's working, one isn't, it's $38 an hour. If you have two children, it's almost $43 an hour that you need. These numbers don't add up. And again, I can't emphasize how tough this job is. It's a hard job. Yeah. So, and let me tell you how hard this job is. Bureau of Labor Statistics. Refuse and recyclable material collectors is the fourth most dangerous job in the country. They're in traffic. The conditions are sometimes not amenable. They have a higher risk of heart attack, things like that, because they're, lifting and working all day. So I look at it and I say, well, when you put all these factors together and how essential they are, it's been a week where we didn't have them. And look how bad things got in certain parts of the city in a week.
Well, to be fair, part of the reason why things got so bad in certain parts of the city is because you had people who, despite the fact that the mayor's office was saying, please don't illegally dump, they were illegally dumping.
It became a free-for-all. That's what we're hearing.
And that didn't help when, you see people with, neighbors bringing their trash to these temporary receptacles like they're supposed to, and they're being met with people with trucks full of couches and chairs and stuff that are throwing them into the dumpsters as well, which also kind of tells you what kind of trash our trashmen pick up. Because in addition to the garden variety refuse that they pick up, there's also beds and tables and all these other things that they pick up because it's been put out as trash. They had at one time like a 50-pound weight limit. I'm not sure if that's the going thing anymore, but they had like a 50-pound weight limit where if your bag was more than 50 pounds or whatever it is that you were trying to throw away was more than 50 pounds, they wouldn't pick it up. And folks actually got angry about that. And I'm like, you try picking up a 50-pound bag. If they won't let you put a bag in an airplane that's 50 pounds or more without paying extra, you're asking people to throw away more than 50 pounds of your trash and not giving them any compensation. That's kind of bad.
Yeah.
But what's really going to be interesting to watch here is not only what the union itself does with this contract, but how it impacts other contracts moving forward. Because District Council 47 also took a strike vote. and has authorized a strike because of the progress of negotiations for their contract, which, they're probably looking at what District Council 33 got, and they're like, trying to figure out what moves they can make. And they've already been to court against Mayor Parker themselves when she mandated that everybody had to come back to their offices at City Hall, and there was no more hybrid work. Even if you were hired under a hybrid work agreement, you had to come into the office now, and you had people that actually left their jobs because they couldn't do that for various reasons. So it's going to, and they lost that round.
Yeah.
So it's going to be, say what you want to about the city's law department. It has been extremely good at manipulating the city's workforce to do what it wants.
Yeah.
And I guess that's okay, but what, and I need to get this out for everybody who thinks, because I had more than a few people tell me, oh, this is going to make her a one-term mayor. She even said it herself. She wasn't going to do something politically expedient, which, let's face it, she didn't. But lest anyone think that this is going to lead to Sherelle Parker being a one-term mayor, you have to remember that this is the same city that re-elected a guy after he blew up an entire city block and killed 11.
Yeah.
So nothing is off the table.
No, the city kind of has a short memory.
Yeah, Philadelphia is amazingly forgiving.
Yeah. So one of the things that I keep harping on this, but even if District 33 had gotten the number that they wanted, I still don't think that's enough, right? Mm-hmm. That number would have brought their pay up. I think their average pay to $52,000 or $53,000 a year, something like that. It's still not enough for how difficult the job is, being out there in all the elements, and the physical labor that goes into this, and how essential this job is, how important this job is to making the city run. I think every job is important, except CEOs. But yeah, they're not important. We don't need them. But people who do these they're essential workers. They're important workers. They do a lot of work, and I still don't. If I'm a member of this union, I don't feel good about the way any of this went, from the way the city and management behaved, and then to the so-called resolution that we saw today.
Well, probably the person who's got the most explaining to do right now is Greg Boulware.
Yeah.
The president of DC 33. He's probably got the most explaining to do of anyone right now. And I do not envy him that task.
No.
Because these people already came in being the lowest paid workers in the city.
Yeah.
And they leave being the lowest paid workers in the city.
Still.
So you start to ask questions like, what is the sense of me remaining in a union when the union can't do what it needs to do to make sure that I'm taken care of, that I can take care of my family? During her press conference, the mayor talked about how the pensions were going to be 100% funded by, I believe it's 2036.
I think it's 2032.
2032.
Yeah.
And that's great. If you're, and there's going to be a cost of living hike for people who are on a pension. And that's great if you are already retired.
Yeah.
But if you're not retired and you're still trying to figure out, how am I going to pay my $2,200 a month rent? or my $1,500 a month for a studio, which is the average in Philadelphia.
Yes.
If you're trying to figure out how to pay for that, before you retire, then what does this, the promise of retirement doesn't really, hold anything for you right now, because you're thinking of the here and now. You're thinking about, school is going to be coming up soon. I need to get school clothes for my kids. Or you're thinking, I wanted to take my kids to Disney World. Will I ever be able to do that? Can I even afford Great Adventure? Great Adventure is not far, but it's also not cheap. Same thing with Hershey Park and Dorney Park. I saw an article where a union VP said that when District Council 33 does a trip to Dorney Park every year, it sells out. And the reason why it sells out is because most of their members wouldn't be able to take their kids to Dorney Park if they couldn't get that discount. And Dorney Park is like $60 a ticket.
Well, and that's a big part of this point too, right? Like that's not a basic, but right, it's not too much to ask for to be able to take your kids to do something like that. That's not a big ask. And if you can't really afford that, I mean, it is incumbent, I think, upon the city to look at things like that and say, well, what does quality of life mean? Does it mean you're just getting by, and or does it mean you can have these, what I think are normal experiences with your kids and all that? I mean, these are, I think these are some of the issues we're talking about here.
And that's true. Now, there were things about how this all played out that, made people a little uncomfortable. Like, no one should go around giving out people's home addresses.
No.
By all means, if you wanted to dump your trash at Mayor Parker's doorstep, you did not have to try to go to her literal doorstep. Mm-mm. City Hall would have been fine.
Yeah.
But by the same token, was wrong? Yes. Two things can be true at once. It was wrong for folks to show up at her house with their trash. Yeah. But it is also wrong for you to use the phrase fiscally responsible on a near constant basis when you're dealing with a contract, when the people who are negotiating for that contract have watched as you have borrowed $900 million, or you've asked the Commonwealth, you've asked City Council to loan you $900 million. And we still don't know what you have done with that.
While you're cutting taxes.
Yes.
Which is costing millions of dollars a year.
Mm-hmm. So somebody's got to define fiscally responsible in this context for me. Because when I look at the 5-year plan, and you and I are geeks that look at the 5-year plan all the time. When I look at the 5-year plan and I see that in both of the 5-year plans you've submitted in the last 2 years, the fund balance is next to nothing. And that is probably the best indicator of fiscal responsibility that any of the lending agencies that you use as a guidepost. How can you sit there and say you are being fiscally responsible when nothing else you've done, with the exception of lowball this union, has been fiscally responsible?
Yeah. I'm not sure, Denise. I don't know how any of this adds up. But it didn't work out well for the workers who do these really hard jobs. There isn't any other way to say that. Mm-hmm. And there isn't any other spin on it.
And the thing is, first of all, everybody needs to remember that District Council 33 was the lone union that they could not get to change their mind about their endorsement for the mayoral primary.
Yeah.
And, I'm not sure what, if any, part that played in it, but it's something that I kept in the back of my mind.
Right.
as this
Right.
entire thing was going on.
Yeah.
You know, when Mayor Parker was having one of her press conferences at the Art Museum steps, she said that she didn't care if she was a one-term mayor, as long as the city was, you know, in good fiscally stable hands by the end of her tenure.
Yeah.
We are now going to get to see whether or not that happens. But like I said earlier, you got to remember this is the same city where a guy got reelected after dropping a bomb on a house and taking out an entire city block.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't have been able to force the workers back to work on the injunction for the 86 strike if folks would have said, you know something, maybe we don't want a mayor that blows up city blocks.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So we're gonna have to leave that there, but I believe there is more to come on this story in the coming months. I think we haven't heard the end of this yet. So Denise, tell us what we're gonna see next.
Okay, we are seeing my friend Will Ford is a reporter from Maryland Matters. It's a nonprofit news agency that deals strictly with like the Maryland legislature and state of Maryland. And he sat in on the Supreme Court hearings for the suit by a group of parents who wanted to have the option to opt their children out of any educational program that featured LGBTQ books, and they won in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court agreed with them. So we talked to Will about it, and here is our interview with Will Ford of Maryland Matters. Okay, we seem to have a technical difficulty here.
Well, why wouldn't we? It just wouldn't be one of our shows without something.
Did you send it to me, Larry?
You sent it to me.
I sent it to you. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So we when I started asking questions in this interview, I don't think I really had any questions. More statements like, what are we doing here? So that's kind of what we talked about in this interview. Is this going to work, Denise, or do we need to switch it up a little bit?
Well, switch it up a little bit.
All right. Why don't we bring on Lance Haver a little early here on the show? And what we'll do is talk a little bit about SEPTA.
Okay, where is Lance?
Uh-oh. So we're in all kinds of trouble right now.
Yeah. Live radio. Gotta love it.
Well, so one of the key things about the Supreme Court ruling, and this is something we talk a little about in the interview, you know, at what point is a parent or anybody an expert, right? So one of the things that always got me about the COVID debate is we're talking about, you know, do your own research. No, I'm not going to do my own research. That's what the doctor's for. I don't know what I'm reading. I don't know what I'm talking about. That's why I asked my doctor. And if my doctor says get the shot, I get the shot.
Something is recording.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah, it is recording.
Oh,
There we
okay.
go.
It is recording. So now there's all this stuff we have.
All right. That was the unedited.
That's
There
all
we
right.
go.
Okay. You guys ready?
Yep.
Yeah,
All
go
righty.
for it.
So I guess I'm starting this, right, Larry? Okay. Okay, you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 FM here on Philly Cam Radio. And we are here with William Ford. He's a State House reporter for Maryland Matters, which is a nonprofit news organization connected to the state's newsroom network. And he was one of the folks that was sitting in on the Supreme Court arguments related to the recent decision to allow parents to opt out to allow their children to opt out of anything that features books that have LGBTQ themes or characters or anything like that. Thanks for joining us, Will.
Not a problem. Not a problem. How you guys doing?
We're good. We're good. Can you tell me a little bit about how this case ended up at the Supreme Court in the first place?
Well, let's see if I can try and summarize it as best I can. It started in the 2022-23 school year in Montgomery County, Maryland. And for those who are not familiar with Montgomery County, Maryland, it's a suburb of Washington, D.C. And the school system in Montgomery County is the biggest in the state. The population is more than 1 million people. And it has, it's a very, parts of it is very affluent. So you have folks who have a voice and will make their voices heard, but it's also very diverse. So, but going back, started in 22-23 school year, and you had some parents who wanted to not have their children allowed to be in classrooms to hear any LGBTQ plus themed materials because a lot of it went against their religious beliefs. And you had some of these parents are Jewish, some Christian, and even some Muslims, Catholics. And the school board in Montgomery County actually allowed for the children to be opted out. But in March of 2023, they reversed the decision. And that's when you know what broke loose. But see, the court technically didn't rule on the merits of the full case. They basically sent it back to the lower courts to say, that Montgomery County, you got to provide an opt-out for parents. But what the ruling will do in effect on a national level, you're going to have a lot of parents that's going to come to school boards across the country and say the same thing. I don't want my child listening to any of those materials. I would like them to opt out. And Justice Sonia Sotomayor, who is one of the 3 liberal justices, and she's the one that wrote that sent an opinion. She basically said this is going to create administrative chaos, and chaos is in quotes. Chaos.
Okay.
And that's where we have here. It could be chaotic.
Okay, now, I guess, did the parents see these books before they decided to, go to the school board and say, we want our kids to opt out? Was it something they had read? What inspired this in the first place?
When they saw some of the books, they heard the titles, they said, no, and see, some of us in elementary schools. And the parents are like, no, that's not right. And this is where the difference of opinions come in.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you go to some book experts, they'll tell you, or authors, they'll say, wait a minute, that's not even close to being inappropriate for that elementary age level. But these parents say, no. We believe it is. We have to say so, and it's all right to say what we want. And the conservative justice decision, as a matter of fact, it was written by Samuel Alito, who wrote the opinion, and the direct quote, the board should be ordered to notify them, parents, in advance whenever one of the books in question or any similar books is to be used in any way, and to allow them to have their children excused from that instruction, end quote.
So does it mean they have to have an alternative to that instruction? Because in the end, I mean, these kids may be able to opt out from these books, but they can't opt out from the lessons themselves, and they're going to be behind. Is there an alternative? Do school districts have to provide an alternative to anything that parents want to opt out of?
And that's kind of the court's decision, telling Montgomery County and any other school board in the country that you're going to have to figure out a way to make sure Johnny, Judy, and Sue, whose parents say we don't want that material, to figure out another way to give additional instruction. It doesn't matter what it is, but they have to do it. And that's where there are a lot of education advocates and the teachers union feels that said, well, teachers are already overworked. Now we got to figure out a place for where Johnny, Joe, and Susie are going to have to go and be ostracized from their classmates. But the parents of the children do not feel that way. As a matter of fact, let me give you one of the quotes from what one of the parents said during a press conference call Friday. Her name is Grace Morrison. And this is what we're dealing with, ladies and gentlemen. She basically said in the press call, quote, and she's a Montgomery County parent, the school board took away my family's ability to raise her daughter according to our faith. Given her learning challenges, she struggles to grasp why her parents and teachers may disagree. Thankfully, the court has put an end to Montgomery County's exclusions of parents like me. It made clear that when it comes to raising children, the mother and father always get the final say. And then she went and added, quote, storybooks that celebrate inappropriate gender ideology, end quote. So this is what we're having. The Supreme Court has opened the door to allow challenges like this to happen.
So what are you hearing from the community itself? I mean, the community other than the people who filed this lawsuit that led us here in the first place. What are you hearing from the overall community that's been, kind of put in the spotlight here?
I haven't done a deep dive in terms of going into various neighborhoods, but just general anecdotal opinions, it's pretty much the gamut. Matter of fact, I talked with someone who's a woman with Moms for Liberty, and she's based in Harford County. Mm-hmm. He's thrilled by it, absolutely thrilled. Mm-hmm. I have actually even talked to this gentleman who teaches in one of the school systems here in Maryland. He basically, without me using his name, he said, I'm shaking my head right now at what the court did. I'm just shaking my head. And I'm paraphrasing, and he mentioned how the courts have just put an X on some children in our schools.
Okay. Well, I'm going to give you to Larry McGlynn, our co-host here at Hall Monitor, and you're listening to Hall Monitor here on WPPM 106.5 FM.
Thank you, Denise. And Mr. Ford, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, sir.
So people can't see when I'm not on the screen, but I've been rolling my eyes the entire time because these arguments are insane to me. And I don't really know where to start here. So I'm just going to go with this. I agree with the chaos aspect of this, because what happens if my kid goes to public school and I disagree with math? Because those numbers were invented by somebody who wasn't in the Christian faith. I don't want my kid having math anymore. Now what? What do we do?
And therein lies the problem. Because that is where some people have said they have opened the floodgates to other things. Now, the parents and those who are for it are saying it's not that deep. Well, when you kind of read the opinion, you can lead, what's the phrase? You can lead a horse to water. Yeah. Well, there's going to be a lot of horses coming to drink after this decision.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Sit here and be naive that it may not happen. It's a little tough to swallow.
So, and then, some of the things I had read about this, one of the arguments is religious liberty. Religious liberty. Well, if that's the case, are rulings where courts determine that the 10 Commandments are appropriate for school, if I send my kid to a school and I don't believe in the 10 Commandments, well, now that has to come down. So where it seems like we put the unstoppable force against the unmovable object here. You've taken both sides of religious liberty and said, well, if you object, it shouldn't be there. But you've also said certain things can be there if, the community says it's okay. I don't know. Was that discussed at all in this case? And does that create a strange, now what do we do situation?
The way I read it, it didn't go that deep.
Okay.
And they purposely would not go that deep. Now, because some of the merits of the case still have to be down to the lower courts. Because matter of fact, it was able to go straight to the Supreme Court just to discuss it. Now, I'm not a legal expert, but from what I read, Once in a while, that can happen. So you wonder, well, why did the Supreme Court take a case when the lower courts are still discussing it? Well, if you go and look at the background of the 6 justices that supported it, that can give you a little inclination of where they stand on when it comes to parental rights, quote unquote, parental freedom, quote unquote, religious liberty, quote unquote. So this case, believe it or not, it's opened up and could open up in another, at least, because this case may come back up at least another 2 years. And when it does, that's when people should look for, as your questions you had raised, Larry, that's when certain cases like that one turns out, let's say, if you're doing a math problem and you're talking about, well, suppose there's 3 individual boys and then you have 2 girls. What's the total of that? And somebody may say, well, wait a minute. Who are the boys? Are they heterosexual? Are they homosexual? Wait a minute, what's going on? Yeah, that could come up because that's when the Supreme Court already gave an inkling of how it could rule overall just by this decision. So it could be really opened up even more in another couple of years.
Reminded of this Lenny Bruce show, which I cannot tell because this will be on radio and television. But when he talks about, talking about the LGBTQ community in schools and, what happens and what doesn't happen. And what you find out is that you have really good teachers who are doing a good job. And then, they get fired because, or they have problems because they get into reality a little bit and explain, what the world is like. So that's why this quote from Eric Baxter of the Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty really stuck in my craw. He said, kids shouldn't be forced into conversations about drag queens, pride parades, or gender transitions. Who was talking about that in an elementary school?
You talk to a teacher, they'd be like, not us.
No. And that's the thing. It was the whole Trump thing where, kids go to school and then they come home and they're a different gender because they had surgery at school. The fear mongering is out of control here. And I just can't understand it. That wasn't really a question, I guess. None of this makes sense to me.
Well, you brought up something that made me think about in terms of educators. Suppose you have an educator who happens to be gay. Will that teacher now be fired just because that teacher is gay, even though the children have been learning lots from this individual? I mean, can you imagine that you could have educators who've been teaching for like 20 years? They may resign just because of this decision alone.
Yeah. Yeah, and we can't afford to be letting good teachers walk away now. There's already shortage. It's a huge problem.
I was going to say shortages all across the country.
Yeah, it is. Here in Philadelphia, we see it all the time. I mean, it's horrible. Thank you so much for bringing light to this and coming on to talk to us about it, because this is an incredibly nuanced thing. And I agree with you. I don't think this is the end of this. I think there's a long way to go here and a lot of ramifications. So I'd like to turn it back over to Denise Clay-Murray here on Philadelphia Law Monitor.
And thank you so much for joining us. Where can we find your coverage of this story and of all of the fallout that's going to probably be a result of it?
I'm working on another story this week in terms of really focusing more on Maryland. But you can go on marylandmatters.org and you'll see some of my stories there. This topic isn't going anywhere. This will be ongoing for a couple of years. And I would say for those they're in the city of brotherly love, pay attention. There, and matter of fact, outside of your suburbs as well. This could be, you could have parents sending in letters starting now, just from that decision, requesting the school board, and when schools restart in the fall, we would like some of this in our schools. The Supreme Court has allowed this to happen, and it's coming.
Okay. Well, thank you. Well, we really appreciate you coming on.
Not a problem, Denise.
We really appreciate it.
All right, we'd like to thank Will Ford for being with us, and now we'd like to bring on Lance Haver to discuss what's going on with SEPTA. Lance, how are you tonight?
I'm all right, but it seems like what we basically are doing is just reporting on upsetting news.
Yes.
Working people who didn't get the raise they deserved, school kids who are just not getting the education they deserve, and now SEPTA riders who are not going to be getting the service that they didn't deserve. I'd
Yeah.
like to start, before we discuss what's actually happening, with what the chair of the SEPTA board said before he voted to dismantle the SEPTA system, because I think this really tells us exactly what we're up against. So I'm going to play, this comes directly from the SEPTA board meeting where they voted to end public transit in Pennsylvania. And here we go. Let me see if I can get this to work for me. I'm hoping that I can.
And SEPTA's history. We've talked extensively over the past 2 years about SEPTA's funding crisis and the severe impact it will have on our customers and the communities we serve. At public hearings, in letters, and on social media, we have heard personal and impassioned accounts from thousands of riders about SEPTA's vital role in their lives. But without action in Harrisburg to provide new funding for public transit, we must now consider an operating budget with 45% service cuts system-wide and a 21.5% fare increase that are needed to balance a $213 million structural deficit. This is a vote that none of us want to take, and we've worked hard as an authority to prevent this day from coming. And to be clear, this does not have to happen. If an agreement can be reached in Harrisburg to deliver new sustainable funding for public transit for SEPTA and transit agencies across the Commonwealth. We are encouraged by last week's bipartisan vote in the House to pass a broad transportation funding package that includes Governor Shapiro's transit funding plan. This is an important step, and I want to thank the tireless efforts of our legislative delegation to advance this legislation, and I urge all members of the General Assembly and the Governor to continue working to fund transit in this year's budget to ensure these drastic measures are not necessary. Public transportation is no stranger to funding shortfalls, and I think it's important to remember that it was another major financial crisis that led the General Assembly in 1963 to establish SEPTA to save vital public transportation services.
Now, I think that he said quite a bit, but here's the thing. He says he didn't want to take the vote. So the question is, well, why did you? What he will not tell the public, and I don't understand why, is that SEPTA is sitting on what's called a service stabilization fund. And last year there was $535 million in it. This year they're saying there's only $335 million in it, but they won't say where the $200 million went to. Last year, SEPTA ended the year with a small balance. Now, again, I know it's $1.3 million balance. If any one of us had $1.3 million, we'd be rich. But SEPTA is a $1.2 billion business. $1.3 million isn't a lot of money compared to the size of their operating budget. But still, $500 million is. And what you heard him say was the structural deficit, meaning how much they're short, is $124 million. They have, according to themselves, without explaining what happened to the $200 million, $300 million in PNC Bank, private profit-making bank. The bankers, the stockholders are making a lot of money on that deposit, and SEPTA is not willing to use it. Now, when the general manager was asked, well, why don't you just use that money? He said, well, we could use it, but here's the problem. If we used it next year, we would have the same problem. So we'd only be buying ourselves a year. Now, if you're working second shift, if you're losing your bus service or your train service or your subway service, would you rather lose it this year or next year? Would you rather give the people in Pennsylvania an opportunity to vote out of office the elected officials who are not supporting public transit, or would you rather give up And this is really what's at the heart of the issue. For the past 20, 30, 40 years, SEPTA has passed its budget before the state has passed its budget. The state of Pennsylvania rarely passes its budget on time. So every year, SEPTA has projected that it will successfully lobby for the money it needs to keep going. This year, SEPTA has said they don't believe they'll be successful. They have given up before they've even fought. They have said, in the past, we were always budgeting on the hope that our lobbying efforts would be sufficient and that we would get the money that we needed so we wouldn't have to make the cuts. This year, under a new general manager who has clearly said that he is interested in looking at privatization of the bus lines, that he can't budget based on hope. He can't budget based on the belief that SEPTA is going to be successful this year. Instead, he has to budget on the belief that SEPTA will be a failure, that they will not get the money that they need. And it is inconceivable to me that none of our elected officials have called him on this. There are two more points that I want to make. And I understand that I might sound very upset, but it is so hard to listen to these people when I recognize what other people have done to fight for poor and working people, that they have been jailed. You know, 2 members of District Council 33 were on a picket line and they were hit by a truck, hospitalized. And these board members lack so much courage. They lack a backbone. They lack the ability to stand up and say, we know this vote is wrong, but we think we have to do it anyway. They won't even take the risk of saying, we're not going to harm the riders. If sanitation workers will get out on a picket line and risk their life for the basic necessities of life, these comfortable lawyers who are making $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 a year sit in a boardroom, who are called sir and given everything they want, aren't willing to stand up and say, I'm not going to harm a poor domestic worker. I'm not going to harm a hospital worker. I'm not going to harm the person who cleans up after me by taking away their bus service because somebody someplace might ask me to resign because I didn't vote for the cuts. So the elected officials who are all out there in front of SEPTA and all lobbying and all trying to protect the Democrats, Governor Shapiro, by saying the problem is the Republicans, have not asked SEPTA, well, how much cash do you actually have? And here's the second point. SEPTA's proposal is to first eliminate the buses in the city transit division. So they're going to eliminate 50 buses in the city. They're going to raise the fares in the city to the highest in the nation. And 6 months later, they're going to start eliminating the regional rail lines. Most of the savings that SEPTA needs come from eliminating the regional rail lines. So rather than cut the regional rail lines first, which would of course harm people who are in the suburbs, people who have a choice and could drive to work, people who don't have to use public transit, rather than take that away from them, they're going to take away the buses from the people who are the working poor who don't have a choice. They're captured riders. They have to get on the bus if they want to go someplace. If they want to go to the doctor, they want to go to the church or synagogue or mosque. If they want to go to work and they don't have enough money to buy a car, they have to ride public transit. That's who SEPTA is going after first. And only after they take away their service, after they raise their fares to the highest in the nation, cut 20% across the board, after they remove 50% of the bus lines, after they shorten another 20 bus lines, after they do away with our kids' school bus system, then they're going to ask the regional rail lines to kick in. So why isn't a single member of city council asking, well, why do you have to go after the city riders first? Why can't we use the money that's in the stabilization fund? Why do we have to do this? Now, for those people who want to understand a little bit of inside baseball, for lack of a better expression, why does the SEPTA board do it this way? There are 3 reasons. 1, The new general manager, unlike the other general manager who was forced out, is open to privatization. He's on record, unaired, and now it is an unaired interview, but on an unaired interview, which we have on tape, if he wants to dispute it, he says, yeah, I'm open to privatization. The Republicans in Harrisburg want to privatize. They've privatized some bus lines in Denver. We're willing to do that. We're willing to look at that. So that's the first thing. Second thing is he is telling the Republicans in Harrisburg that he is willing to do what the Republicans want to do, which is harm the riders. The belief that if the SEPTA board says, look, Republicans, if you don't vote for the money, here's what we're going to do to poor and working people, and you don't want that to happen, is so crazy to me that I don't find the words for it. Here's a Republican Party that's not only going to take health care away from poor and working people, not only going to take SNAP food away from poor and working people, but the results of those cuts of Medicaid and SNAP means that rural hospitals are going to close and supermarkets in counties like Elk and Potter County are going to close. Now, these people are voting for that. They're supporting that. And now you say, well, we're going to tell you that if you don't support public transit, we're going to harm poor and working people. You don't want that? Well, of course they want that. That's their entire operation. They want to punish poor and working people even more. They want to do away with the New Deal. They want to do away with the safety net. They're supporting that. So why does anyone think that telling them that if you don't fund public transit, we're going to put the gun to the poor and working people of Philadelphia and that will move them is just beyond belief. Now, the mayor could have put an end to this. The mayor could have had her representatives on the SEPTA board veto this proposal. That would have been. Many years ago, when I worked for Mayor Street was faced with a very similar situation, but had a very dissimilar response. Mayor Street had the city representatives veto the cuts and veto the proposals. And he mobilized literally thousands of people to go to the state capitol and get the money that was needed. This year, the new general manager is saying publicly, we're willing to cut the service, we're willing to privatize the service, and if we don't get the money from the state Republicans, we'll do what the state Republicans want to do, which is harm poor and working people. The last part of the inside baseball is, I believe that there will be a little bit more money. But the way they accept the board has done it is usually they would have passed the budget asking for all the money. And if they didn't get it all, then they'd have to hold hearings and decide what they're going to cut. Now, because they've cut everything, whatever little money they get, they're going to be able to add back. And there's not going to be any public scrutiny of which lines they put back and which lines they don't. So the public loses out. It is a horrible situation. Public transit is good for the environment, it's good for business, it's good for retailers. It's one of the few institutions who is primarily interested in serving the working poor. And we have an elected official, a mayor, we have a city council that make all these wonderful speeches about how they want equity, they want to help poor and working people. And yet here it is, and they're completely silent. Not a single word, not even the Working Families Party has spoken up and said, you can't do this, SEPTA. You can't take these routes away from our school kids. The charter schools, the magnet schools, the schools will all make the kids suffer because of what SEPTA is doing. And that's my report. I wish it wasn't so. I am looking forward to the night I can come on the air and say, you know what? Here's a bunch of good news. Because I'll feel better about it.
Hopefully next week. We're going to have to leave it there. So thank you, everyone, for being with us, and we'll see you next week on Hall Monitor.